In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do a drawing from a photograph. We're going to be using Photoshop for this, and we're going to be working on drawing a drawing for Albert Einstein, that is. And I'm going to supply you with several pictures, and they're going to be uploaded to your D2L site. And so this exercise is going to consist of 3 videos. And the first tutorial will cover the drawing. The second tutorial will cover how to shade and render and add texture. Do a grayscale drawing. Okay, do grayscale painting, that is. And then the third one, we're going to color that, okay? And so let's get started. I'm going to actually close up these images here. I've done several drawings of Albert Einstein, and this was just one of those. And I can probably close this right now. All right. I'll just say what the last version of it is. I also have some references on drawing heads that I'll be uploading to our D2L site. But what I'm going to be doing is in Photoshop here, I'm going to get rid of my application frame, and this is something you can do on a Mac. I don't know if you can do it on a PC, because the last time I worked on a PC, you couldn't get rid of the application frame. I like to get rid of it so I can actually look at lots of images at once. I also will upload this caricature of Albert Einstein in case you want to try to make more of a caricature of him, because with a caricature, what you're doing is you're exaggerating features of a person. It's it becomes more of a cartoon almost, and I'm going to do something a little bit more straightforward. But if you want to, you could actually do one of like I said, caricature. This was an earlier one I had done. Also, I've been practicing this. This, like I said, I've got some proportions stuff for the head. But anyway, let me get over here. We'll discuss these drawings in just a second here. This was what I had done in Procreate. And so this has the reference. This is actually the first drawing I had done. And this was what those paintings were based off of. It looks like him. I kind of actually think it looks more like an actor whose name was Jack Albertson. And you guys wouldn't know who he was because he died decades ago. He starred in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the original one. And he played the father. He was a big movie star back then. But anyway, I'm going to close that one up. But we're going to upload this image here, okay? And these images here. So you can actually take a look at. There's one that has a drawing of him. And what I like to do is I like to set it up so we can actually look at multiple images at the same time, okay? And I actually flipped some of these images. And the way I flip them is in Photoshop you can go up under image and do a flip, but you can also do it under view. And I actually have a keyboard shortcut set up. So it's set to F5, and I'm actually going to show you where you can do that at, because up under if you go to edit and go to keyboard shortcuts, you can actually go and find view, and you can go all the way down. You'll see it down here. There it is, flip horizontally, okay? And what I did was I used the keyboard shortcut F5. And F5 was set for something else. I don't know what it was. I didn't use it. But I would recommend that you set up a keyboard shortcut for flipping, because it makes your life a lot easier. And I prefer to use the F keys because I don't have to hold down the command key. It makes it much faster that way, okay? So I just wanted to show you that. There we go. Okay, now, the other thing I want to talk about too is all these windows, they're not, usually when you're in Photoshop and you have it like this, if you take a image and you bring it over, it will dock. I actually have disabled that so that I can actually move these things around. And so if you go into your settings, is it workspace here? Yeah, okay. Open documents as tabs, enable floating document window docking. I unchecked that right there, okay? And therefore, I can move these around without them getting in the way. Like I said, this was in Procreate. I have all my images here, but in Photoshop, what I like is you can actually have your images where they're floating out like this. So if you're on a PC, you can't get rid of your application frame, you can pull out your images like I'm doing here, And what I usually do is make the windows smaller, but enlarge the areas I'm looking at, like I'm doing here, which will make my life a lot easier. Okay, and you can actually, I get the zoom tool right here, and then I can actually go over here to get the zoom tool, because if you hold down the Alt key, you can demagnify if you need to, and it won't change the window size. Okay, because a lot of times if you do Command plus, it'll change the window size. But if you're just doing what I'm doing with the zoom tool, you actually go to the zoom tool. You could actually enlarge or demagnify. If you hold down the Alt key, demagnify like this. And it's so important to get this set up so that you can actually look at all your images here and focus on whatever you want to be looking at. So the way we usually start this is I'm going to set up a letter size page. So we'll go to New, and we'll do a letter size page, 8.5 by 11 inches that is. This will be a vertical format, RGB, 300 pixels per inch. We'll do create. Okay. Let me see here. The other thing I should have done too is I'm going to actually go back here to my workspace, and because I pulled some things out, we're going to reset essentials so it's more like this, because that's usually how you guys will see it. But by having these drawings up, this kind of helps you understand something about how to draw the human head at different angles. Because I'm not going to draw, and I don't want you drawing him straight forward looking. I don't want you tracing an image. I don't want you, copying an image. I want you to make your own drawing, and to do it at an angle. And so typically what we start with is we start with a head shape. And I think the most basic foundation for a head shape is actually doing more of an egg shape. Now, let me go back over to my layers here for just a second and explain something. Right now, I got a background layer, and that's, if I drew on top of this background, that would be like drawing on paper, because it's filled with white, and I want to draw on a floating layer, and we can actually delete this layer here now. Yes, we'll delete background layer, because I want it to be a floating layer, because if I need to cut something out, like let's say I draw one of the eyes and I want to change the scale of the eye, I won't have to be having these holes in this paper that would happen if I left it on the background layer. Okay, so let's get started here, and like I said, what I'm going to do is I actually, and let me talk about the brush I'm using here. Okay, so let me bring over my brushes just so you could take a look. In your basic brushes, you should have dry media brushes. And in your dry media brushes, these are Kyle's brushes. Okay, I have legacy brushes that you have to load up separately, which we may be using at some other point in time. But for this tutorial, I'm going to be using basically this Happy HB pencil to draw with, and then I'll be using a couple of these brushes to erase with. So like I said, let's get started here. And what I generally like to do is I like to try to draw kind of an egg shape like this, okay? And so this is set off to a little bit of an angle here. And I've been drawing so I make it look easy. And you may have to draw this several times to get it looking right. I'm going to actually shrink it down a little bit. So I'm going to do Command T and make it just a little smaller here. And maybe even distort it a little bit, And by holding down the Shift key and the Alt key, I can kind of distort this so it's more like that. And let me continue on. We can move the head later on too, again. So generally speaking, if you take a look at all these guidelines here, it's always good to have a line that shows you the center of the face. And so in this drawing, I'm going to have him facing this way. So the center of the face is going to be something like that. Okay? And, you can always make a little different mark here. I'm just playing around here. That might be bad. Not bad. Okay. And it curves and arcs around the face. That's why we're not drawing it as a straight line, okay? Because, the face is curving. Now, the other thing, too, is we want to indicate where the eyes are at. And so the way we do that is the eyes are actually in the middle of the head. So if this is our head shape, then we're going to draw the eyes kind of arced around like that. Okay? So we're looking down on him just slightly, okay? And then the nose is located halfway between the chin and the eyes. So I'm going to do another line here like this, and that's not bad. I'm just looking at that. Maybe I could try it one more time here. Sometimes it takes us several swipes here to get it to look right. Maybe the first one was better. Okay. Now, if I was in Procreate, I would be able to hold down and make a nice arc. But I think this will be okay for the moment. And then the mouth is located halfway between the nose and the chin. So if we take a look at some of these drawings here that I have up, I'm going to get rid of these drawings in just a second. But if we take some look at some basic drawings, and you see this is the kind of egg shape. Some people will actually draw a circle first in starting the head. I like to just do an egg shape because it kind of generally just gets the head shape. But as you can see here, the eyes are about halfway in the middle of the head. The nose is halfway between the eyes and the chin. And, the mouth is halfway between the nose and the chin. The nose is halfway between the eyes and the chin. So, and then you see where the actual eyes, not the eyes, but the ears rest. The ears generally are somewhere between the top of where the eyebrows at and the bottom of the nose. So that's kind of the size of a general ear, okay? And so by knowing this stuff, it's very helpful if you haven't drawn the human head much, or maybe you may have done drawings from pictures, but I think it's important to know how to draw from, your imagination and draw from knowledge. So I'm just trying to put this where the mouth would be at. Maybe it's like right there, okay? So this is going to be just kind of helpful for me. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer on top of this. I'll go back down to this layer for just a second and just make this lighter because it's going to be just our guides. Okay? The place I like to start off with usually is drawing the nose. And I'm going to close this up here. And this is very helpful to look at if you want to try to draw him at different angles. You might want to try looking at this to see what kind of angle you want to look at him. Maybe we're looking slightly up at him. I like to put him kind of slightly looking down on him. So I'll close this one up too and get back to all of our references over here, okay? And I'm just going to collapse the brushes for just a moment. But if we take a look at his nose, the tip of his nose is very bulbous. It comes out, it's got a kind of a bulb shape, like a light bulb. And so, generally what I'll do is I'll start off by kind of drawing a nice rounded, and I'll go behind, in order to make this look like we're looking down on him slightly, I'm going to go a little below that center line there and draw this kind of bulbous shape here. And then we can draw the bridge of the nose. And then the bridge of the nose is going to be angled more like that. And if we want to draw the other side to help us out, we could do that. And then the nostril is kind of another curve here, like this. And then we can close it off with another curve like that. And that kind of creates a nice nostril. Now, we might even see a little bit of the other nostril on the other side of the nose here, just like that, okay? So now that we've got that down, we can start off with some other things. And we want to start off with, the next thing is the eyes. And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit on this. So first thing, knowing how to draw eyes is important. And eyes are kind of football shaped. They got a curve on the bottom, like this. Now I'm just trying to get a good curve there. And then they kind of have a curve going up, but it kind of goes more like that, or like this. There, yeah, that's more like an eye shape. And if we're going to draw another one, it'd be like this one on this side. And it's good to practice. If you have any spare time where you're sketching your sketchbook, and hopefully you keep sketchbooks, because I still keep a sketchbook. One practice thing to do is drawing eyes and drawing noses and drawing ears. So we're going to start off by putting his eye, and if you look here, the eye starts off about where his nostril ends, somewhere around there, if you take a look. And so I'm going to draw in kind of an eye shape here, like that. And we can always perfect it more later. if we need to. Okay, and then we're going to draw the other side. Now this other side here, is going at an angle slightly because we're trying to curve the face just a little bit, and plus this will be closer to the bridge of the nose since we're looking at it from this angle. Okay, and so that's why I'm drawing it at this angle and not having it the same distance, because if we were looking straight on, there'd be the same distance between the bridge of the nose on both sides, but since we are drawing him at this angle, we're going to see less of this inside part. Okay, and you'll see it more in this drawing right here. Okay, so now that I've got basically the eye shape down, we don't see much of his mouth. We see kind of his bottom lip, if anything. Okay, and we see his mustache. So I'm going to draw out his mustache here, and he's got kind of a big bushy mustache, kind of like the Monopoly guy. And so let's look and see where the mustache ends. It goes way out here. To where about the eye ends. And like I said, we could always make changes. I'm going back up here to the eye for just a second here. All right, so now that we've got some features in, we can actually start to work in his chin. And like I said, I'm just using that drawing underneath of that egg-shaped drawing with the lines just to kind of help me know where to put the chin at, and I'm going to draw in the chin. Kind of more like that. And then we can start drawing the sides of his face, the contour of his face, and it's pretty straightforward. We're going to see less of this side. It's going to be very close to the eye. And we're going to go curve on up here to get the top of his forehead. And then we're going to bring in, his cheek comes down a little bit like that. But then he's got kind of, I don't know what you call them, jowls or whatever. It's like these little, sagging skin here. Since we're looking at him as an older man. And so we're going to put those in there. Also, there's this crease here on the side of his face. We're going to put in like that and even hint at over here. Okay, so it starts to look like him. And one thing I always do when I draw is I like to flip my drawing. And I tell this to my concept art students, that you should flip your drawing. And that's why I showed you about flipping it. And, we can see and take a look and see what that looks like. And, he's not bad. He's a little wide. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually do Command T on him for the moment. And actually, before I do that, let me get rid of these eyes up here. I'm just going to lasso them quickly here. These little drawings I made of eyes. We'll just delete those. And now I'll do Command T. And what I'm going to do is, and this is what I love about drawing digitally. We can actually, I'm going to hold down my Command key so I can kind of distort him just a little bit. And maybe bring over the face just a little bit more like that. There we go. And that's why because if I was doing a drawing, I'd have to re-erase it. I'm looking at this eye here, and I'm going to move it just a little bit. And I'm using my keys on my keyboard, and I'm just looking to see where I want that. I think maybe right there, just a little bit. I just moved it just a little bit. And like I said, it's good to reevaluate when you draw and flip things for a little bit and see what things look like. Okay, now let's continue on. I'll flip it back so I can actually draw in we'll draw in where his eyebrows are at. Okay, and his eyebrows are just it's weird because they start kind of almost over here inside the eye. This one you can see a little bit more over here. So I'm not making these big, usually I make people with much more distinct eyebrows, but his eyebrows are fairly small compared to most people. It's almost like they're missing some here. Like usually I would draw the eyebrow starting there, okay? But looking at these pictures, I'm doing it more like this, okay? So and now we can go in and start thinking about areas to shade, and I'm just going to do a little bit here. And then he's got very, and not in all his pictures, but he's got bags under his eyes. And, this picture right here really is pronounced here. So it depends on how much you want to pronounce those bags under his eyes. And I'm just going to kind of indicate that. I'm going to show the upper eyelid like that. And then the skin kind of bags like this. It kind of comes down. It makes him look droopy. After looking at his picture for so long, it almost looks like his eyes are kind of slanted on both sides of the face, where they're slanting off. But a lot of that is because of these bags and just this baggy skin here. And so we'll put that there. I'm just looking at these different pictures here to see, what it would look like between the eyes and the eyebrows. And then I'm going to actually indicate more like this. I'm going to actually shade some of the nose here. I want the light coming from this angle here. That's why I'm shading him this way, and a lot of the pictures are showing him shaded from this angle. Okay, and what we want is a drawing that defines him enough so that when we go and do the grayscale, it'll be a good starting point. All right, we won't be working right on top of an image. We'll be working from our drawing. I'm going to actually have a cast shadow of his nose, because the nose will cast a shadow here onto his mustache. And mind you, if I'm making this look easy, it's only because I've been doing this, practicing it. I've been enjoying this, really. I'm going to do this part right here where the chin is coming out. See the little line right there and the little shadow? That's what I'm doing there. But we're seeing it more at his head more at an angle, so we see this. Now, the hard part for me, and this is just me, is drawing where his irises, okay? So let's draw a nice circle there. And then we're going to draw another circle here. And that one is more elliptical. I'm just trying. And let me flip this and see how that looks. So he's kind of looking this way. Let me change this here. I'm trying to make it more circular over there. And then we'll put his pupil, which is basically like a lens, right in the middle of there. Okay, let's flip it back and see what that looks like. It looks a little funny. I could probably live with this for the moment. I'll probably go back to it again. But we've already got quite a bit drawn here. And so next thing we should do is start drawing the ears. And, the ears are pretty far. Like, if you took a look at those pictures, and if we're looking at the head from a profile view, the ears are in the middle there. So there's a lot of distance here between the eyes and the ears. So they're going to come all the way around here somewhere. And it's always a good idea to look at pictures of ears. And actually, let me see if we can open up some of these. I downloaded some pictures of different things here. Here's nose, here's ear. Okay, I'll just open these two up so we take a peek at them. But knowing how to draw ears is so important, and those are the noses. It's nice to look at noses. I'm just going to close that one up. But he's got somewhat normal ears. I say that because the only thing is if you take a look here, this area really is very pronounced there. Okay, it's not so in this drawing here. Someone might have looked at a drawing of an ear when they were drawing it. But anyway, let me come back here. I'm going to brush here, and we'll start drawing the ear. And like I said, I want to look at this picture here. So let's actually zoom in on that part of the ear there while we draw this. Okay. And then I'm going to actually shade this in here, like this. And we might have to distort this a little bit because, I don't know, right now I'm thinking it looks more like we're seeing it from the from our, straight on, from the way I've drawn it. Of course, his hair is going to be overlapping that. So we might be fine here. I'm just going to keep going. Let me flip this and take a look here. It's always good to take a look. All right, so it's not bad. I say that to myself, trying to give myself the confidence that, oh yeah, this is looking great. Because sometimes it just feels like I enjoy drawing, but really my strong suit is shading. I love to get in there and do the shading once the drawing gets done. And sometimes, for me, I find my mistakes in my drawing when I start having shapes and value, and I start to have all that shading in there. Then I start to see my major flaws more. And I've always been that way. It's just I could do a beautiful line drawing, work on it for a long time, and then next thing I start looking at the shading, and I go, okay, there's some things that are out of proportion here. And so, and the thing is, when you work digitally, the great thing is you can always fix things, even when you're doing the painting part, okay? But it's good to get as good of a drawing as we can, and being a little loose with this hair here. Let's go up here and put the hair in up here. Maybe it comes down a little bit more since we're looking down on his head a little bit in this drawing. And like I said, you could try drawing him at different angles. It might take you several go-rounds to do this, because as you saw all the drawings I did, it's, I've been doing this over and over again. The other thing, too, about drawing digitally, and it's the same as drawing on paper, is if you need to really start over, you don't have to really start over. What we can do is we can always make a new layer, and then we can actually lower the opacity here and start drawing on top and fix things. And that's generally, I do a lot of that, when I work, is I'll go in and I'll work so far, and then I'll go, okay, well, I'm going to redraw this again, but make it better. And so I just want to point that out, because I actually think my drawing's going okay here. Yeah, but I just want to point out that you can actually fade back your drawing, treat it like this is tracing paper, and draw on a layer above, and therefore, you can actually do a better drawing that way. And so, if it's not looking as much like him as you want, and you see you got to make changes, that's another way we can do it, okay? I'm just going to turn that off there and bring this all the way back up. Because, like I said, I think for the most part, this drawing's going okay. I may look at it in a minute and find a mistake. It's very hard to draw while you're talking, because usually, it's like I'm more of a meditative state when I'm drawing. And, one thing is that once you really enjoy start drawing and it's working for you, it's very relaxing. But when it's not going well, that's when it gets stressful. And so, like I said, I want you to understand all the tricks there are, because, like I said, you can always fade it back. You can always draw on top like it's tracing paper, so you don't have to delete your drawing and start over. No, you draw on top of what you have and make it better. Okay, and then also you can always select areas and distort them and move them and rescale them. If you've drawn a really nice nose and you go, oh, that nose is too small, or you want to make it a little larger, or maybe it's whatever you want to do, you can just select it with the lasso tool, do Command T and change it, okay? I'm just drawing this part under his neck because we want his head to rest on something. We don't want it just floating. And now here's the deal. I'm going to be drawing him with a shirt and tie and with a jacket, and I'm not going to make that mandatory for you. If you want to put him in a sweater, because there's this picture of him in a sweater, you can put him in a sweater. I think I have another picture I'm going to upload too that has him in a sweater. So if you want to draw him wearing a sweater versus wearing this, then you know, you can. I When I was illustrating, I used to do a lot of work for business magazines, and I had to draw a lot of guys in business suits, and I got good at it eventually. I learned how to make it work, but it took a while because I'm not the type of person that wears a suit and tie. I hate wearing ties, and I don't find much use for wearing a tie. I own some zip-up ties in case I need a formal occasion. I didn't own a suit jacket for years, and just because I don't dress up like that. I usually wear a t-shirt and flannel shirt. Um, okay, I'm gonna move this whole drawing up a little bit like this, so we don't need this bottom part anymore. I can delete that if I need to, because that was just to get us started. Okay, but I want to move his head up, just move him around just a little bit, so he's in the center of the page, and I'm going to draw the rest of the suit here. And like I said, I've drawn this several times, and I've drawn suits a lot. So, I'm looking at where his jacket is, and that's the thing is usually the jacket rides up along the back, so it's like this, and then we can bring this part down here. Maybe we have a hint of a vest, and then following through here, if it always helps, you can always draw the suit on a different layer and follow through, because sometimes that's a helpful thing to do, is to imagine what would it look like behind him, if it makes it easier. And the hard part for me is these lapels, because in all the references I have, even this one right here, it doesn't show what the lapel looks like, and the lapel is this part of the jacket. It, it's like it kind of vanishes. So I'm going to draw, this side of the lapel first, and then so I'm drawing that part there, and then I'm going to imagine it kind of curves around like this, and does the same thing, like that. Okay. So now we've got pretty much the drawing done. We'll flip it around here. See if we need to change anything. Let me do Command T here. And I'm going to actually distort. Now, you can do the same thing in Procreate. I may do a Procreate tutorial if I have time here. I did one for the last exercise. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my grids, and we'll do a grid that's, say, there's 3 by 3. Okay. And one of the great things about drawing in Photoshop or Procreate or any kind of raster-based program is that you can actually go in and distort things a little bit and make it better. So I'm just trying to make this a little bit better. Maybe it's more like that. And we'll take a look. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do undo and see, did that make it better? Yeah, I like it. I think it did make it better. So let's go to my histories palette over here and go forward again to transform. We'll flip it again. And I'm always doing this because it's very helpful. Now, let's get on to shading this side of the face. Actually, you know what? I'm going to actually flip here again, because I find that at the angle this is resting at, I'm just much easier at shading this way. And we want to kind of show his forehead. And then we'll do some wrinkles on top of his forehead in just a second. I want to indicate shading up here. And let's look at this drawing here, and also this here, to kind of help us. We can flip this one. We'll flip it so we can at least see it from that angle. So the shadow kind of comes out here a little bit. I'm getting a little too dark with my shadow, so I probably will take it back a little bit by erasing part of it out in just a second, And so, when I erase, I usually generally like to erase with the same brush, but as you know from our last tutorial, in order to find that last brush, you have to go through all this to find that Kyle's pencil brush, and it might be close to up here. I don't know, but what I'm going to do is, because I'm going to treat it like a kneaded eraser, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually for my eraser I'm going to use a nice soft round brush. I'm going to make this bigger. And by the way, when I'm resizing my brush, I'm using my brackets. Remember, you got a right bracket and a left bracket, and it's right next to the P key. So the right bracket enlarges. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the flow and the opacity. So I'm going to take the opacity down to 30. I'm going to take the flow down to 40. And I'm just going to go over it. And this is kind of like using a kneaded eraser if I want to knock anything back a little bit. Now we can go back here, and maybe what I want to do is when I'm putting in all the shading, I'll take the opacity of this pencil brush, this HB brush, down to 50, so it's not so dark, okay? And so next I'm just going to show the shading along his cheek here. So this may take you a little while, and as long as you get looking somewhat like him, or if it looks kind of like a guy with a big nose and a mustache, and it looks kind of and bushy hair, I think that pretty much looks like Albert Einstein, or maybe Mark Twain, because that's the other thing I'm looking at going, yeah, he kind of maybe looks like Mark Twain there, You're fine, because this is just an exercise to show you the process for our project. And our project, I'm going to have you do, I'm going to give you a choice for our project. I'm going to give you a choice of either doing a historical figure, and that means someone who's dead, who is famous, or a fictional character. Fictional characters, like from a novel or from, even the comic books like Batman, might be fun to do. I don't want somebody that's heavily masked up, because you want to be able to see the face. Like Batman's a good one to use. Not Spider-Man would not be, because he's all mask, we want someone who can draw features. So be thinking about that as you're drawing this. Like what could you do? Because you want to be able to base it on reference, and that's why I'm teaching you how to draw this, looking at pictures, but not copying a picture. Because I know a lot of teachers may just have you copy a picture and do a digital painting, but to me that's, for one thing, it's just not the same, because it's almost like cheating in a way. It's like, it's a good exercise, but I think it's better to know how to draw something and then shade it. Anyway, it's like I say, it may take a little while here, and I had one student one time who just, well, he was an illustration major, but he did not know how to draw. He was learning how to draw. And this was the Art Institute, because that's what they would do, is they would allow anybody in at the Art Institute to take class. Oh, I don't like that. I'm going to undo that. So anyway, this student, I always bring in art books with illustrators, and so I'm going to flip this again here. So anyway, he was looking at this book of this guy named, I think it was Drew Struzan. He did movie posters, and he painted them, traditionally. And so there's a page of all these different versions of the same poster, drawings, color studies, and they're very detailed. He goes, "Whoa, he did all this. That's so much work." And he was just like, it was like, to him it was just like work. I said to him, you know what? It's not work when you love what you do. And that sort of started to sink in to him. And it's like, anyway, he finally started to put the love that he needed to into his projects, because you do need to get involved in this, because doing any kind of art project, it's not like doing an essay. You're actually committing the time to create something, and you need to really get into it. And like I said, once I get into drawing, I love doing it. It's so cool. and it just takes my mind off of all my problems, and I lose track of time. That's the one thing that happens. So anyway, I'm thinking this is getting close to being done here. Let's look at this flipped again. You know, now on some of my drawings, I actually shaded in the background. I'm not going to have time for that on this, and I don't know if you really need to, as long as you know kind of where the hair starts at, because when we're doing the next stage, we're going to be blocking things out with silhouettes first and having to redraw things and make them better, because that's the thing when you start shading, you're making things better there. And I'm just going to, maybe he gets shaded up under here a little bit more. That helps, I think. No, because I'm just kind of picking and poking and fixing little areas. But I hope this helps you out. Like I said, it may take you several go-rounds, because let's say you got to this point and you realize, oh, there's some major flaws and I want to do it again. Like I said, you can lower the opacity, make a new layer, draw on top. And what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you submit this drawing. And I'm going to need to save this one. So we'll save as. And you want to save everything you do as a Photoshop file, okay? And I'm going to save it on my computer here. And we'll call this, Moyers and Einstein drawing. And then you would submit that. And you can get rid of any layers that you don't want to show, but I think that's basically what we're going to be doing for this exercise. And so you want to get this to a good stage. Oh, you know what? I forgot, and I'm trying to end this too soon. Let's draw in his wrinkles, okay? And talk about those for just a moment. Let me look at this picture here. Because sometimes, I did one other tutorial, I just sort of ended it. I didn't talk about saving it or anything, because I was just sort of tired. And so this is my second go-around with this tutorial. And I was hoping to do one and just get it over with. But sometimes I do my tutorials 2 and 3 times if I'm not happy, or if I forget, like, oh yeah, you got to do this. And it gets to be a pain in the butt, but, I'd rather do a good tutorial in the long run. So what, if you look at his wrinkles, they're pretty low on the head, and there's a defined wrinkle right here above his eyebrow, okay? And then there's one over here on this side, and then we can erase out. I'm probably going to erase out one, because I think this one is too far up. The other thing too is we can always lasso it if we like to, but I'm just going to erase this out. I'm going to make my brush a lot smaller. I'm going to bring my opacity up to 80, so that I won't have to. And no matter what, when I do erase in a digital program, I do not like using the brush for the erasing at 100% flow and opacity, because it just all of a sudden is like, boom, it's gone. It's always good to have it a little lighter, okay? And let's take this part out for the hair. So his hair comes down here. There may be a little bit of shading in the hair. Anyway, like I said, again, I hope this helps you out. You try your best. Try to see if you can get, like I said, you want to aim for big nose, big bushy mustache, crazy hair, bags under the eyes, bags over the eyes, kind of like this here. And we want to give him a neck, okay? And put him in a shirt or put him in a sweater. And that's what you'll be doing for this, okay? And so I'm going to end this, and like I said, you'll be submitting your drawing, and that will be the first part of this exercise.